Hello and welcome to the Future of Work and HR stream at CogX Hybrid Festival 2021. I'm Naomi Patel, Policy Manager for Skills, Talent and Diversity at Tech UK. These sessions in this stage today have been curated by the Institute for the Future of Work. Please get involved in the conversation on social media. The hashtag is CogX 2021 and the app is Future Work Institute. We have a really exciting session coming up, exploring trends for the future of work. In particular, a topic I know dear to everyone's hearts, digital skills and upskilling. On the panel today, we have Lord Jim Knight, who is the co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on the Future of Work, which the Institute for the Future of Work sponsors. The APPG will be open to applications for corporate members and good work champions who've pledged commitment via the Institute's Good Work Charter. We also have UCL's Rose Luckin. Rose and I actually spoke on UCL's Disruptive Voices podcast a few weeks ago, discussing what AI developments could mean for the future of work in the UK and how we can redefine our understanding of good work to harness AI's potential for future change. Chairing the session today, we have Naomi Climer, co-chair of the Institute for the Future of Work. Hello, Naomi.
Hello, Mimi. Thank you very much for that introduction and welcome to this session on the future of work, particularly focused on skills. So as you heard, I'm the co-chair of the Institute for the Future of Work, and we are shaping a better future through, we're shaping a fairer future through better work. We're an independent research and development institute that explores the changing world of work and builds practical solutions to help people thrive. So this obviously is a topic very dear to our heart. And as you heard, we've got two incredible speakers today who have huge expertise in the area of skills and the future of work. So I'm expecting a very lively conversation. And what we're going to do is hear from both of the speakers to kind of set the stage and then get into a conversation and talk about the issues that come up. So we're going to start with the first speaker, Rose Luckin, who, as you heard, is a UCL professor. She's the author of Machine Learning and Human Intelligence, The Future of Education in the 21st Century. She's also the director of Educate. She's a specialist advisor to the UK House of Commons Education Select Committee. She's co-founder of the Institute for Ethical AI in Education and a member of the UK Office for Students Horizon Scanning panel. So pretty eminent, I think you'll agree. Rose, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Naomi, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. It's such an important topic, and we've been doing quite a bit of work at UCL, as you heard just momentarily ago when we were talking about disruptive voices, on what does good work look like. And I think it's interesting to see the extent to which the trend has moved away from concerns about people's roles being automated away, which is where the conversation was 3 or 4 years ago, to concerns about the way in which AI and human intelligence are working together and whether that relationship is fair and equitable. And I think your recent Amazonian report is really important in this respect, because for me it highlights the way in which AI is not always visible. I think when people had concerns about the fourth industrial revolution originally, there was this image of a robot coming and taking your job away. Or as we moved into concern about white collar workers, images of the technology taking over and perhaps you as the human operator being somewhat de-skilled by this smart tech that had come over and started dictating what you needed to do. If we think about algorithmic trading, for example, but actually the truth is that's not quite what's ended up happening. And I think what came through to me in your report very clearly was the way in which AI, which is not obvious, is still controlling people's lives. And the partnership between human intelligence and artificial intelligence is not equitable. So if I'm being judged on how quickly I scan my items in a supermarket and by a device that's just tracking the number of people in the queue and the speed with which I'm scanning items, that's not so obvious, and yet it's still a way in which AI is fundamentally influencing what good work looks like. And so it changes the perception of what the partnership between human intelligence and artificial intelligence might be like. Because I think in conversations about good work, that's one of the fundamental points, is to work out what the right balance is between the human intelligence and the artificial intelligence. If we're going to have our roles augmented by artificial intelligence, then surely good work must be work in which the human intelligence is increased and improved, and we're augmented in a way that makes us capable of more, not in a way that dumbs us down so that the AI does the meat of the task. And crucial to this is understanding what the AI can and can't do, and where human intelligence is very much superior. And then looking at how you build roles that leverage the best of both of those intelligences in a way that actually makes sure that we're not dumbing down our very valuable human intelligence. That was one of the main reasons why I wrote the book on human intelligence and artificial intelligence, or machine learning as I termed it in the title, because I was really concerned that people were over-endowing artificial intelligence with more intelligence than it deserved, and under-endowing human intelligence with less intelligence than it deserved. Absolutely, artificial intelligence is super useful. It's really, really good at certain tasks, but it has no intelligence when it comes to some of the things that humans can do that we often take for granted. There is no way in which an AI system can reflect on its own thinking, for example. And yet that kind of meta-intelligence gets us around the world all the time. It helps us to become much more sophisticated in the way that we think. It helps us to plan. It helps us to understand how we're in different contexts and we need to behave differently because we're in a different location, we're interacting with different people, and there are different expectations of us. It allows us to monitor our own emotional intelligence and to monitor that of the people around us so that we can work well together. So as we look at this trend towards seeing partnerships between artificial and human intelligence in the workplace, we have to make sure that there's more equity in these relationships. And for me, one of the key ways of doing that is by helping everybody to get AI ready, as I would call it, so that people understand enough about artificial intelligence, particularly machine learning, data-driven AI, so that they're aware what the AI is and is not capable of doing, and what it means for a technology to be data-driven, what it means for an algorithm to be making decisions. And so I think we have to help people get ready. I don't mean everybody needs to know how to code in Python or needs to know the advanced mathematics that sit behind a neural net. Not that at all. But they do need to have a contextualized understanding of the AI in their particular workplace so that they have a much better chance of leveraging that AI to their own benefit rather than it being taken over, their benefit being the AI taking them over. Of course, that means that organizations have to take responsibility for ensuring that employees are treated fairly and equitably, and that what is being done with any AI that they're involved with in their roles is transparent and has their informed consent. And it is that informed consent that's so important. And in order to give your informed consent, you need to understand a certain amount about AI. That comes back to the point about AI readiness. So I think one of the practical things that we have to push is helping everybody to become far more aware of what AI is, what it can do, how it's different to human intelligence, what it means to be data-driven, how they can be more proactive in understanding what's going on. And we need to persuade employers what good work looks like, and how actually it would be far more motivating for their employees for there to be a much more equitable relationship between the human intelligence and the artificial intelligence. And I'm going to stop there because I know Jim will have lots of slightly different things to say, and we can get the conversation going.
Okay, thank you, Rose. There's a lot to think about there, and I have a number of questions. However, I think we should move on to Jim and then see where the conversation takes us. So, Jim, as you heard earlier, Jim Knight, or also known as Lord Knight, co-chairs the All-Party Parliamentary Group on the Future of Work. He was a member of our Future of Work Commission. He's a former minister for both education and employment, and he now works commercially advising business on skills and education. So I'll hand the floor to you, Jim. Carry on.
Thanks very much, Naomi, and it's a delight to join you and, of course, Rose and everybody else at CogX. And I guess I'd start with the statement of the bleeding obvious about what we've been through during the pandemic, which is this rapid acceleration along the adoption curve in terms of the use of technology. And it's almost too early to reflect on that, but it's important that we do try and do that. And that there's a sense that we've kind of crossed the Rubicon in terms of technology being much more embedded in the way we all work and affecting so many different things. You know, just the geography of economic life, I think, will shift as though, you know, it's almost a definition of privilege. Those who've had a good lockdown are probably those who are privileged enough to be in the kind of work, in the knowledge economy, in the digital economy, that they can thrive working at home, as opposed to those who, many of whom are working, but they're the people working, delivering the shopping that we're not allowed to go out and get, delivering the takeaways that we can't get, working in hospitals, cleaning in hospitals, doing all of those services, keeping sort of backbone of the country running. And yeah, the Amazonian report that has been referred to was, for me, really important in just highlighting how vulnerable so many of those workers are. You know, prior to the pandemic, we saw this to some extent with Uber drivers, I guess, with versus taxi drivers. The taxi driver knowledge in London suddenly being displaced by an algorithm that is in part showing Uber drivers where to go, and there are other platforms apart from Uber, but also managing them. And this tension and competition between labour and capital, and sorry, if Rose's mic could be turned off, then I won't get this really distracting echo. Thank you. So this competition between labour and capital that is going on to businesses and iteratively erode the level of skill that's required by those people, so that they are more vulnerable to being displaced by machines. And the point at which they become replaced is the point at which it's more economically sensible to invest in the machines than it is carrying on paying the wages of the workers. And that is just a downward spiral in terms of the rights and conditions and the pay of those workers. Now, of course, you then contrast that with people like me and many others who are able to really thrive working at home. I can't really foresee myself working much in an office ever again. I certainly would be one of the, I think, very, very many people who, maybe 2 days a week are going into central London. For me, as someone who lives in southeast London, me being able to think about, I'm lucky enough to have a second home up in the far reaches of Scotland. I now know, as a result of lockdown, that I can work perfectly effectively from there too. And suddenly I've got all of that privilege. My advantage has been exaggerated by my ability to thrive in this sort of environment. And what are the consequences of that for work and for the economy? Well, if there's lots more people like me, and the geography really changes, that has a big impact on transport workers. It has a big impact on people who provide office services, cleaners and security and so on and so forth. It has an impact clearly on retail. I think many of us have looked at what's happened in the care sector during COVID, and we would want to use technology to keep our loved ones living more independently at home. Of course we would. And we're more distrustful of care homes because we've looked at how that's kind of played out. We're a little bit unhappy about that. I can't, I occasionally have to wear a tie to appear in the House of Lords, but I wouldn't want to be in formal clothing retail in particular right now, because I can't see when that is coming back. The only people I know who wear ties and jackets are people who work in schools and in Parliament, but maybe I'm just pretty limited in the people that I know. So there's lots of change going on, but I also think some management thinking has changed. So it's not all about evil managers of commercial organizations deploying this evil set of algorithms in order to de-skill and erode people's paying conditions. I do think there's also been another swathe of people in management who have been thinking that actually they have responsibilities beyond just to their shareholders, and they have responsibilities to society and to the environment. We've seen even the Daily Express with a big green campaign and Sky with a big climate campaign. And it's not just about climate. There's other signs that it's really up for grabs right now. And this is why this debate is so opportune. Between management thinking of the 80s, which is all about delivering shareholder value, it's all about, if you have to screw over a whole bunch of workers, that's what you've got to do in order to keep the profits up and to deliver your multiples back to your private equity owners. And there's that lot, but then there's a whole other bunch that want to do it better and do believe in good work and want to move in that direction. And we need to put that debate right out there and have it and help those that are on the good side argue that case. And then the only other thing, Naomi, that I just wanted to reflect on was the need for education and skills to respond to some of these trends that we're seeing. The World Economic Forum recently suggested that almost half of skills, I think 43% of skills that are needed by employees to be effective in the workplace will change within the next 3.5 years. Now that's really rapid, and the demands that places on our skills infrastructure to be much, much more dynamic and much more flexible and responsive to labour market changes, I think it's really profound. It's really urgent. We need a school system that educates children to be more rounded individuals, that develops their social, their emotional, their physical intelligence, as well as their cognitive intelligence, that profoundly develops them through the whole education system to bring their human qualities to the fore, because otherwise they'll be outcompeted by machines. And that goes to Rose's work. To be less siloed in their academic learning, because the perception is what the labour market really values are people who can think across silos of knowledge, not solely within silos of knowledge. And then there's some policy responses that I think we need. I think we need a universal skills fund. There's a lot of talk about a universal basic income. Let's have a universal basic skills income for us to be able to invest in renewing our skills through our working lives, so that the concept of lifelong learning is properly resourced. And there's a whole bunch of other things that I would want to say, but I would finish by saying I've got such a strong sense of urgency about this that there's lots of talk of levelling up. There's lots of talk about the unfairnesses and the lack of equity that's been exposed by the pandemic really harshly. We have to sort this really quickly because we're a divided nation and we have to come together. We can come together and regenerate on the basis of education that anticipates the trends in work and the labour market, not reacts to them. And to date, we've had a very reactive education and skills system, and we have to flip that around and move it on. And I welcome this sort of discussion as a part of having that debate.
Well, thank you, Jim. So we've got some really interesting themes coming through here, from getting everyone AI ready, which I think feels really important, to kind of how do we persuade, for example, companies that lazily using AI to de-skill the workforce actually isn't in the long-term interests of the company, let alone society and individuals. So I think there's some strong themes coming through, and the root of that being in how we educate feels right. I will just mention the report that you've both mentioned, the Amazonian era report, is an Institute for the Future of Work report. Thank you very much for mentioning it, which you can find on our website, www.ifow.org. And that talks about how much evidence we found that AI, when implemented without thinking, tends to de-skill workforces, and that's a big concern. So, Jim, you did mention a few sort of solid ideas for things we could do, like a universal skills fund. I'm just wondering, that there's how do we fix education in the first place? How do we educate the wider population about AI and what it is and what it means? And then how do we persuade companies to do better? And obviously the ESG agenda, the shift in shareholder focus is helping with that. But those are kind of pretty big questions. So I'm just interested almost to hear you both explore what you think are the things we could get cracking on sooner rather than later that would help with all of this. Rose, do you just want to kick off?
Sure, happy to do that, and I'll leave Jim to pick up on the ideas that he gave about skills funds, which I think is a great idea. But also I want to pick up on something that Jim brought in at the end, and that is actually it's humans who are making the decisions about this. We worry about the AI, but actually at the moment we're still lucky enough to be in a world where truly autonomous AI systems that are generally artificially intelligent are not ruling the roost yet. But humans are making some pretty dumb decisions, to be frank. My 7-year-old grandson will be able to tell you what a fronted adverbial phrase is, and he'll be able to tell you how to use it and when to use it. Will he also be able to tell you what an AI is and why AI needs data and when AI uses data? Now, which of those do you think might be the most useful by the time he comes out of school? I think I know which one it'd be. And until we really start persuading the humans who are in charge of our school system, we really are going to struggle, to be frank. And that's where Jim's point about urgency comes in. And coming back to humans again, I mean, in my world of AI, we always talk about human in the loop. We must have a human in the loop, human in the decision-making loop, human in the loop of design to make sure things are ethical. But actually, the humans in the loop are often the problem too. If you think about those systems in your Amazonian era report, it is the humans making those decisions, as Jim was saying, don't worry about the workforce as long as we please those equity owners. And there are, of course, responsible employers. Absolutely agree with you, Jim. Many people realizing that there are lots of different ways in which people can work, and that of course has its own consequences. And as you rightly point out, it's always the people who are the most disadvantaged who are the most disadvantaged by these trends. So I think it is the biggest challenge is about persuading the humans who are making these decisions about precisely what they should be focusing on. And so I think Jim's suggestion of practical solutions around things like a skills fund are great. However, I think there's also a problem with those humans making the decisions, and that is, I would be pretty sure most of them don't really understand anything about AI, and there should be a huge imperative, and perhaps we should focus on policymakers and business owners first to make sure that they really understand the implications of AI, that they are capable of looking at challenges, looking at their businesses and saying, okay, what's the data in my business? What could an AI system scoop up, learn from? What could it do with this? How could it help us to be more efficient, to be more effective, to be a better employer? How could it help us to care more about supporting our employees' well-being, to look at their work-life balance? If I'm a policymaker, if I understand more about the technology, then I can make much better decisions. I can really understand why we desperately need to change the education system, and that means we need to change the assessment system. And hey, that's where the AI comes in, because with the proliferation of adaptive platforms, continual formative assessment becomes much more of a reality. Lots of ethical conundrums on that, I know, but it comes a reality that can then start to show people how we really don't need exams and tests anymore. We really do need a much more modern education system that helps our students when they leave whatever formal establishment they are at, it's schools, college, university, to be able to not be replaced by the AI technology, to actually be able to augment the AI technology to their power and their benefit. So I think I will always push the education, the practical actions that we need to take in education. But I think Jim, as the policymaker, is in much better placed to talk about how we might finance that. My last point on this is I would say it's a false economy. It's a really false economy if you don't leverage the human potential of your company, of your society, to be happy, fit, healthy, satisfied, working effectively and efficiently. So it's a false economy.
Thank you. Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I incidentally just really endorse what Rosa said about the need for AI literacy amongst policymakers, and and to be able to understand the consequences of algorithmic bias and some of the ethical things, but then just fundamentally understand what they need to know, what they need to understand, and what they don't need to worry about, so that you can kind of deal with, I don't need to take a maths degree to understand this, but I do need to understand these other things, these human implications of what the AI is and how neutral it is or it isn't, and so on and so forth. In respect of, those human decisions being made by managers of businesses, I mean, obviously, let's say you are running Amazon and you decide that you're going to move to a low employment model and replace all of those people with machines, or go to a low labor cost model because essentially you are trying to cut cost. You're part of then moving to a lower employment, lower consumption overall economy, because the people who are workers are also the people who are consumers. So Amazon's, if the likes of Amazon and their supply chain are part of driving down wages, in the end, it's going to damage them. Now, of course, they have a surplus profit problem, which they're choosing to spend on space rather than on employing lots of people. And, I've got nothing against space. There's lots of good science to be had out of it. But, if lowering cost was releasing loads more money for investment, and we knew where we were going to invest loads of money in order to employ lots of people in enduring, enriching human occupation, then I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with trying to manage that transition for people from dull logistics work into something that is enriching and rewarding. Of course, that would be great. And please, if there are employers going down that road, then we should hear all about that. But the fundamental thing is the whole employer community, the whole economic community needs to be able to address the demands of communities that have feel abandoned by the end of the industrial age, and are fearful of the future. And how are we going to give them hope? Now, in my head, regeneration through education is a core part of the solution, because we are in an era now where the labour market demands higher and higher levels of education, and of applied education, and cross-subject education. Now, we're not nurturing that sufficiently, and we certainly are yet to have an adult skills system that properly addresses that. Now, to be fair, the government are bringing in a new skills bill, and we're debating that tomorrow in the House of Lords, but I have all sorts of criticisms of that because it's still rooted in some pretty old-fashioned thinking. But at least they're prioritising it, and we need to try and build upon that. And the idea of a universal skills fund would be, in a way, something that revives something that got abandoned because of fraud back at the turn of the millennium, which was the individual skills accounts, but where the taxpayer, the individual, and the employer can all put into a fund for each individual that then stays with them through their working life, for them to invest as their working life shifts. Because, I'm on my 4th or 5th career now. I don't think I'm that unusual. lots of people are going to need to reskill as the pace of technological change, as the transition to a zero carbon economy, as globalization, all are forces that are beyond the control of any individual government, or indeed the G7 governments that have just packed their bags and left home from Cornwall. So that's the sort of how it would be funded. And then the other big issue in my head is the extent to which we think about skills and education through the currency of qualification. And for too many jobs, especially in the digital economy, qualifications just aren't agile enough to keep up with the changing skills needs. And we need to embrace some of the innovation that we see in various places that are sort of going beyond that, either through partnership with universities. I think Arizona State University does a really good job in partnering with employers to help them grow talent in partnership with the university. There are others. I'm working with something called 01 Founders that's doing some really interesting work around teacherless, qualificationless, no prior attainment software engineering development that is extremely effective, inspired by a guy called Nicholas Sadero. So it is possible to do things without there having to be a qualification at the end of it, if the employers are sufficiently engaged and hungry for that talent. And there's a lot of talent shortage, and we just need a skill system that develops it. I could matter on, Naomi, but that's my sort of response to those various things that you threw out at us.
Oh, thank you. My understanding is we're out of time, although we are moving to a Q&A session in a second. So for now, I will thank Lord Knight and Rose Luckin for some really rich food for thought, and let's move across to the Q&A and continue the conversation there. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.